Hello, and thank you very much for joining us today on our summit, Revitalize You, How to Nourish Yourself to Heal Your Body, Mind, and Soul. I'm here today with Dr. Vera Tarman. Dr. Vera, thank you so much for joining me today. I've been looking forward to this interview. How are you doing today?
Oh, thank you for inviting me, and I'm feeling great. Yes, it's a beautiful day here in Toronto, so it's all good.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, for those of you who don't know Dr. Vera already, let me just give you a brief introduction. Dr. Vera Tarman is the medical director of Renascent and is the senior staff physician at Salvation Army. Dr. Tarman has a special interest in clinical syndrome of food addiction, and she has presented at international public forums and media platforms to educate and advocate on this subject. She is the author of Food Junkies, Recovery from Food Addiction, and is the co-host of the popular Food Junkies podcast. She's also the founder of the free free Facebook group called I'm Sweet Enough, Sugar Free for Life. What a great title. And I know, we're all sweet enough without the sugar.
Right
Uh,
on.
yeah. So just such great work that you're doing. Let's start with, how did you actually get into this special niche of food addiction?
Okay, well, I'm an addictions physician, and I work at two major treatment centers in Toronto for food addiction. And when I started to become interested in the overlap between addictions, like general addictions, I couldn't help but see in my patient population that when somebody stopped their alcohol or their cocaine use, because I saw people in treatment centers and I would see them for that full month that they stopped, that they inevitably started picking up food as a replacement, almost as a transfer addiction, or as a way to soothe their withdrawal from alcohol or cocaine or opiate use. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee that. I started to see it in the general population, how people were using food in the same way that they were using drugs and alcohol. And then I had my own personal struggle in my 20s with weight and food. And that personal experience, I just thought, I'm going to treat my food behavior as if it were a drug. And when I started to do that, I got out of that mess, which was a mess for many years, into a place of freedom from food. And I like the title of your summit. Revitalize body, mind, and spirit. Like, my spirit was released too. It wasn't just a health issue; it was a mental and spiritual release from being under the grip of always wanting to eat sugar or junk food or something that I knew I shouldn't eat.
Yeah. Well, I truly believe that we have to heal from the inside out. And if we don't heal the inside, then that what follows on the outside is just kind of a vicious circle. And we may have willpower for a short time, but eventually we slide back. And I have my own story that I could tell on that too. So, what is a food addiction, and how do people get to that point where it's actually addiction? And I'm sure there's probably a spectrum, but maybe you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a spectrum, and almost all of us are on that spectrum at some level, because if we're eating the foods of the food industry, excuse me, the processed foods, basically what we call a standard American diet, we're at the mercy of basically food engineers that make food highly, they call it palatable, highly palatable. They won't use the word addiction, but they are addictive. And so anybody who eats a bag of chips or a few Girl Guide cookies wants the whole row, or they want the whole bag, and they might want the whole bag and then more. And that's not, they're not necessarily addicted to foods. They're just under the grip of the, basically, they're just driven by what the food industry has put them under. But what happens is, anytime you're exposed to an addictive substance, like if you just start smoking cigarettes and have a few drinks, it doesn't mean you're an alcoholic or a smoker. But if you smoke every day and you're in constant contact with cigarettes or alcohol, you eventually develop like that spectrum. It goes from just being stuck to the addictiveness of whatever it is you're using to then developing your own addiction pattern itself. It actually becomes a disorder within you. And that happens with food, as it does with cigarettes, as it does with pain pills. I mean, the whole opiate epidemic is because not everybody started by, nobody said, I want to become an addict. They're just taking a few pain pills because they've got arthritis or whatever, and then find that they need them all the time, and then they need more. And that very same process happens with sugar and with processed foods. So often people will say, I used to be able to enjoy a small ice cream cone and a small one, but now I want the whole big one. Give me the double, triple size. And some people will say, you know what, if you didn't finish yours, can I have the rest of yours? Like, you end up needing more than you wanted to begin with. And when that process happens, there's an actual development in the brain that we call addiction. And I think to see it as a spectrum is perfect. Early stage, middle stage, late stage, end stage.
Yeah. And so from what you're saying, it sounds like that it's not just one particular food that you can be addicted to. There is a variety of foods. Is it food in general, or really?
Well, the universal is sugar, because that's so highly addictive. So we always start with sugar, and that's sugar in the form of pop or soda. Alcohol. I mean, why is alcohol so addictive? It's basically, alcohol is fermented sugar. It's a big thing of sugar that you're drinking. But you can be addicted to Coca-Cola or Pepsi or something like that. So that's where we start. But once that phenomena, that disorder starts to develop, it ends up being that you end up collecting more addictions. So we start with sugar, but then almost anything where there's been a food engineer in the background designing that food to be addictive can become addictive. And so we start to look at highly processed foods, which include bread, crackers, chips, even popcorn at the movie theater, even some forms of chicken when they put stuff in it, TV dinners, stuff like that. They can become addictive because of a pronounced exposure. So it can start with sugar, then processed food, and then if it gets worse and the person continues to eat that stuff, it doesn't just stay there. Then you become addicted to more and more. And then people will say, even healthy food like nuts, like, what's wrong with cashews? But show me a person who can have just a few cashews and they don't want the whole bottle or the whole bag that they bought at the health food store. Or some people find that they can't eat dairy because they eat too much cheese, for example. And that may not have started with that addiction, but it can morph into that. So it is actually another continuum. And the further along you are on the stages of food addiction, the more foods are addictive. Wow. And if I can just tell you, Debbie, that there was a study done on the most addictive foods in the processed food industry. A lot of people will say chocolate because, chocolate, a lot of people say if they're a chocoholic, and it is actually it's in the top 10 of the most addictive foods. But guess what's the top number one? Pizza.
Pizza.
And that's why people love pizza, right? They always go out for pizza. Some people live on pizza. That's what they eat every day, or almost every day, because it's got cheese. Yeah,
I know somebody that I used to work with that was had pizza for every time. That was her go-to.
Right. So it doesn't have to be sugar. It can morph into pizza.
And I think with pizza, there's this false sense that it's a healthier option from a fast food perspective.
Yes. I used to think in my early days that having a muffin, one of those nice muffins at Starbucks or someplace like that, was healthier than a chocolate bar. But it turns out, or even a drink at Starbucks was healthier than I don't know, soda. In fact, it's just as bad.
Yeah.
And now we know, juice, orange juice, like juice, what you think is healthy, there's so much sugar in that it is just as sugary as soda, and therefore just as addictive. So yeah, it doesn't have to have it can have a name label that's called health food, but it's not.
Yeah, no, that's the aura from the food industry.
Yes,
That
yes.
they look to give things the appeal like they're healthy. For
Exactly.
sure. Yeah.
And I'm talking about this concept of food addiction, and people will often say, you can't be addicted to food, we have to eat food. But of course, we're not talking about all food, we're talking about processed food mainly. Like,
right.
not that many people are addicted to Brussels sprouts.
Well, you know what? If you're addicted to Brussels sprouts, that's probably good on you.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but how can I tell that I have an addiction?
Yeah, so that's in a way that's like asking, where am I on the continuum? Because as I said, I think we're all, if we're eating, in 2023, whatever, in the 2000s, basically,
Mhm.
we're subject, well, actually, since the 1900s, 1950s, we've been subject to the food industry. Um, so, it really depends on how much you depend on your main food as coming from the food industry. But you can ask questions, like, where am I on that continuum? So the first thing is, we always start with obsession, because we're talking addiction now. This is the language of food addiction. How do I know I'm a sugar or a food addict? You can start with sugar, because most people will say yes to a lot of these. Do you obsess about it or think about it? So here I am working in my day, but I'm thinking about my dessert tonight. I'm thinking about the muffin in an hour from now. I'm thinking about how the fact that my coffee with double double, and I want to get to that Starbucks and get a recap. I'm thinking about that stuff as much as I'm thinking about something else, and that thinking about that mental real estate gets more and more, so that I obsess about it, and it can become to the point where, at the end of the night, there's no way I'm going to fall asleep unless I have a little bit of that something sweet or whatever it is. So it's an unusual relationship with the substance, which we call obsession, like a heightened relationship. And then the next thing, so how do I know? Do I think about food all the time? Would I rather eat something than do something else, like go out with my friends? How many of us have made plans to go out and then say, you know what, I'd rather just cancel, watch Netflix, and pull out my bag of goodies, go to the store and buy a bunch of goodies. Like, you start making choices that are focused on the food. It's part of the obsession piece. So am I doing that? Am I embarrassed about the way I eat? Like, I tell people I eat everything. I don't know why I'm gaining weight, but you don't tell them about the binge you had in the middle of the night, or in private. Will I go to any lengths to get that substance? Like my favorite ice cream, well, they've run out of it at my store because I bought it all out from that store. So am I willing to go in a snowstorm to get my favorite thing, as opposed to just say, whatever, I won't have it. Yeah. So those are some questions that you would ask yourself. Do I feel embarrassed or ashamed? I'm sorry about that.
It's okay, no worries. Do you need to get a glass of water?
I've got a bit of coffee here.
Yeah, go for it.
Black coffee, no sugar, no milk. So that would be one piece. And then, do I need more to get the same effect? That's the next one. Like, I was, the first time I had that thing, that dessert, it was delicious, just beautiful. And then the next time I come and I want it again, I need to have more of it just to get that same effect. Which is the classic example of the first time you try the Girl Guide cookies or the cherries in the season, they're delicious, but now you want the whole bag. So do you need more? So that sense that nothing really satisfies you, that's another sort of group of questions. Are you willing to, the next sort of group of questions would be, am I willing to eat this stuff even though it's causing me distress, even though I'm gaining weight, even though I'm pre-diabetic and my doctor said I'm going to become diabetic if I keep eating it, even though it makes me feel bloated and sick, am I still going to do it? So there's that sense of causing harm. And then finally, the last question. So are you doing that with your food, eating it even though you know it's not good for you? And then the last one would be, you can't stop. You want to stop, you've tried, you've been on the diet, you even lose weight for a while, but then eventually you're white knuckling it. You're just thinking about it. I can't wait till I've lost that weight, or next week, like the end of Lent or whatever it is, then I can have it again. There's that sense that it calls to you, the food calls to you, and you cannot stop. And if you fulfill all of those criteria, it's a good chance that you're moved into that development of basically sugar addiction, maybe even food addiction.
Yeah. So I can relate to some of that, because if I have, let's say, some kind of snack in my desk at work, it calls to me until I finish it.
Yes.
But I'm good without having it as long as I don't buy it and put it in my desk. I'm okay.
Exactly.
But as soon as I have it, it calls to me until I eat it all.
And you know, that actually is probably the best indicator of addiction, because what's the solution? What's the treatment? I bet you that's going to be one of your next questions. Yeah. It would be identifying which foods call to you the way that you described. And usually it's sugary stuff, but it could be pizza. And then telling yourself, okay, it's going to call to me if it's in the house. It's, you know, even if you stick it away somewhere at the back of the freezer or something, you know it's still there. If you basically, if you don't have any of it, if you abstain, if you don't have it, then you don't want it. But the moment you have even a little bit, you want it. That's actually a sign of of any kind of addiction. We say in the addiction world, one is not enough. Wait a second, one is too many and 1,000 is not enough. Because if I have one, I'm going to want the 1,000, and 1,000 isn't enough. So you've actually hit on probably the key criteria. If you find that when you have that desired food and it's not there and you don't think about it, and you're quiet, your mental real estate is not focused on food, that probably means you're addicted to that food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not surprised. Can we just talk a bit about sugar? I know it seems to be a major trigger for a lot of people.
Yes.
And what is sugar? Because I have heard so many definitions. Like, I know white sugar, and you know, there's lots of sugar in like soda and all of that. But how do you define what sugar is?
Well, I mean, sugar is traditionally we mean that as a combination of fructose and glucose, and the reason why it's the universal, it's the one that everybody likes, is that the brain thrives on glucose. Like, we need glucose like we need oxygen. It's a fuel for the brain. And so all of us, if we're probably even animals, but certainly we as human beings like sugar because it's so important to our survival, but we don't need as much as we give ourselves. But I do want to say that that's why we like fruit. That's why we like vegetables, like beets have sugar in them. They have fructose in them. So most of the foods that we eat are a combination of glucose and fructose, and glucose is the thing that our brain needs for survival. And fructose in nature it's usually put into packages like with the fiber and the fluid and the skin of the apple or the skin of the cherries or whatever, so that fructose, which isn't the fuel, our brain does not need that. The body can manage that, because fructose is actually the sweetness of the food that we eat. And if we're eating fruits and vegetables, it's a perfect combination of sucrose and or glucose and fructose that will allow us to be well. But what's happened with the food industry is they've said sweet. First of all, we don't need glucose because we're eating enough as it is, but we want that sweet. So they've taken fructose. Basically, it's called high concentration. I can't remember what the word is right now. Concentrated fructose. Like from corn, high fructose corn syrup, that's it.
Yeah.
So like corn, corn is totally fine to eat, but if you take the fructose out of corn, which is what the food industry has done, you can put that into pop, and it makes pop sweet, and it's a lot cheaper than putting sugar in, which is a more natural. That combination is a better. I don't know. It's probably just as bad, but what they do with the fructose is they just put so much, and that overwhelms our liver and causes diabetes and causes liver toxicity, like fatty liver. That's what's making us sick today is this. But anyway, that's you asked what sugar is. That's the sort of main thing. But I also mean things like honey and molasses. These are natural sugars in nature. But if you think about it, honey comes with the beehive, and molasses comes with the bark of the tree. And so does sugar come from sugar cane. And if we ate sugar from the sugar cane, it wouldn't cause the damage that it does. It's when you take it out of its substance, which is the protection, then we've got this potent substance. So it's a really good question. What is sugar? It's basically, when we talk about sugar, we're saying stuff that's been extracted out of carbohydrates like fruits and vegetables and made potent. And now the food industry has made all sorts of hidden, what we call hidden sugars. It doesn't say it's sugar, but it's a sugar concentrate, like fruit concentrate. If you look on the labels, there's a form of sugar. Like labels are, you could do a study of how they hide. Agave syrup sounds healthy. It's too much sugar. All of these things are hidden ways to give you that sweet taste and make you think you're not eating sugar.
So even if you're reading your labels, you may miss. I mean, the labels are very overwhelming, I would say.
They are. Yeah, you have to have a lesson in them. And they've become very crafty. I mean, so what those of us in the field, we've learned to well, basically, we've learned how to read those labels. But you know what the best answer is? A lot of people will say is just don't eat food that has a label. Like, you're not going to get a label on a banana, and you know the banana is okay. You're not going to get a label on an eggplant unless it's got the name of the company that shipped it. But it's, basically people will say anything that has a label is a processed object, and therefore is been manufactured for profit, and therefore profit is not, they're not interested in your health, they're interested in making money.
They definitely are. So we'll come to the next question, which you alluded to a bit, is now how do you break the cycle of a food or a sugar addiction? Really important.
Yeah. So again, we're talking addiction here. And a lot of people will say, especially in the medical world, and especially when we're talking about kids, they'll say, you can't make that person feel deprived because they'll just eat more of it. You got to let them have a little bit, otherwise they're not going to stay in the office and listen to you. They're just not going to, they're going to feel deprived and white knuckle it. And it's not going to work. It'll work for a little while, maybe a few days or a week or 2 weeks, and then they're back and they're feeling miserable because they failed on their diet. So what we say in addiction is find the trigger food, which is typically sugar or pizza or soda. It can be a Starbucks deluxe, whatever. And then recognize that this is a drug. And so when you quit a drug, two things happen. You are stuck to that drug and you need it to feel good because you've become attached to it. So that means when you stop, you're going to go through withdrawal, which you could call feeling deprived. But so that's the first thing. I recognize what the trigger is, and then recognize that you're going to go through a withdrawal. But then the next piece that's important is once you go through that withdrawal, you will be freed. So you have to stop the substance, put up with the withdrawal, and then you'll be free from that food. And how long does it take to get from point A to from stopping to freedom? Usually about, people say 10 days, 2 weeks. It's not a lifetime. It really isn't. Once you stop, so for some people, it's like it's in 3 days. You have a bit of a headache. You kind of want that. But for other people, it might take a bit longer if they're really committed to that substance. And then usually by 3 weeks, you're past it. Now, the next thing is, and then you don't want it anymore. And for those of you who ever smoked, you probably knew in the first few days, you wanted that cigarette. But if you're a long time non-smoker, like 2 or 3 years, now when you think about cigarettes, it's like, oh, I couldn't imagine smoking. That's how you'll feel about sugar. I can't imagine eating that stuff anymore. It would make me feel sick. That's how you'll feel. But it'll take a little while to get to there. But it happens. It will happen. And the only reason why it doesn't happen is when people cheat and have a little bit. So that's like the person who's quitting smoking and then they have a cigarette from somebody else's pack because they say that's not really smoking. It's not my cigarette. But it'll actually make them want cigarettes again. Because remember, one is too many. It'll we set up that a desire to have more again. And so if you don't cheat, and really it'll be done in 10 days or
Wow,
so.
I didn't realize it's that quick.
It's pretty quick. Yeah. And if it's
great.
not quick, it's because you're still eating something that's driving it. Like some people will just quit sugar, but they'll still eat pizza. Well, the pizza's keeping the flame of that addiction alive. You have to find out what all the triggers are, remove them, get lots of support while you're doing that, and then you'll be free.
Wow, that's great. So we talked about withdrawal. What kind of things do you see when you're going through that withdrawal? And I'm assuming it's probably for a few days.
Yes, yeah. It's the worst of it is probably in the first week, but it can be anywhere from 10 days to 14 days to even 3 weeks. But usually the very first thing is you're going to feel deprived of the substance. You want the substance, whatever it is, the sugar, the treat. It's like the alcoholic wants their bottle of wine at night, or else they won't be able to sleep. And so you may not be able to sleep. So instead of the alcohol, a lot of people, they need to have their bag of treats. I used to have like this, 2 or 3 desserts and gummy bears, and it was a whole thing that I had that I needed before I went to sleep. And so if you don't have that, how do I sleep? So there'll be anxiety, there'll be a feeling of possibly insomnia, agitation, distracted because you want that food, and how are you going to work if you don't have that food or sleep or whatever. So it's you might even have symptoms like diarrhea, and sweats. Like it can actually become physical symptoms because people will actually develop a physical dependence on it. It's not as bad as something like an opiate or alcohol addiction, but it's not as bad the physical, but it's as bad because it's how many people when they eat are eating all the time. Like the alcoholic, unless they're already daily drinkers drinking throughout the day, usually have like they drink at the end of the day, or on when they go out, they're not drinking. It's like cigarettes. You can eventually be smoking every hour, and we are eating every hour. And when you have an addiction where you're feeding that addiction hourly by hourly, the physical symptom may not be so dramatic, but the mental is.
Yeah. And I think with food, the difference from food to cigarettes and alcohol is that no matter what, we need food to live. And so it's a matter of changing your choices.
Yes.
To good Absolutely. Choices. And right. As you said, labels are really, if you're buying processed food, you have to look at the labels, but even then it's very difficult to know if something in there you're missing, that it actually has sugar.
Absolutely. Yes. Yep, for sure.
And my daughter decided to do a sugar-free challenge one time. I'll never forget. And so I was busy reading all the labels, and I picked up, I don't know, some vegetable broth. And I was shocked to see that sugar was probably the second ingredient on that list.
Yeah, and like so, soups and sauces. Yes.
Yeah. It's in everything. So, you have to be very careful, read your labels. And first, I guess, is to recognize that you have an addiction, or you're somewhere on that spectrum. And like you said, we're probably all somewhere.
Yeah. Right. And we you have to eat food, but you don't have to eat foods with labels. Like you really don't. And there's a lot of us who don't. And we love our food. That's one of the messages I hope that people get by the end of this talk is that this is not a message of oh my God, this is going to be a horrible life. I'm giving you a message of freedom from that obsession. And the thing that will happen is when you're eating good foods again and not overpowering foods. It's like when you have perfume, you can't smell a real rose. You can't smell just a fresh, a day outside in the spring with fresh air smells good with all of the, new plants and whatever. But if you're wearing perfume, you can't smell it. So the idea here is you're going to free yourself to actually love food the way that the foods that we should be eating, like fruits and vegetables and whatever else, meats and cheese and whatever. But you're going to love it the way it should be had. And you'll taste it in a way that you didn't taste it before. So we're talking about a freedom and a life of pleasure. It's not a life of deprivation after, just for those 3 weeks. That's it.
Nice. That's great. So for our audience members who are listening today, what's one simple change they could make today to improve their health, as you mentioned, and the whole idea of the addiction?
Well, if the person is drinking soda like pop, stop that. There's absolutely no value to that. So I would say get rid of the most overt sugar, the most obvious stuff that is doing nothing but damage to you. So that would be the pop, and that would be candy, and chips, stuff like that. Then worry about the sauces and the condiments and all that kind of stuff. But the most obvious stuff, stop that. And even if you're a heavy duty pop drinker, you'll be surprised. Here's another little piece of motivation. If you've gained weight, it's probably been a lot of belly fat. And for guys who are muscular and they're starting to get a belly, guess what? You stop eating that stuff. And that belly fat, forget about doing abdominal crunches and working out in the gym. It will just melt away, because that's where all that sugar goes, is in the abdominal tissue. It's called visceral fat. And if you've got diabetes and you've got this belly, that stuff is going to start healing very quickly, just by stopping the obvious sugar. Forget about the hidden sugar on day one.
All right. Well, that's great advice for our audience. And I know you have an incredibly generous gift for the audience today. Maybe you could tell us a bit about it and why people watching today need to get it right away.
Okay. Well, I have I did a class. It's a PowerPoint slide class on sort of food addiction, and I talk about the hormonal, like insulin, and the neurochemical, like dopamine, drives to overeat. And it's done in a very understandable format. You want to have a little bit of the biology so you understand why it is that sugar is so potent. And I explain how that is so that you'll understand why it's so helpful to stop. And make you not feel like you're a glutton, but you're actually a slave to our biology, and that you can unslave yourself with this information. So this is a YouTube hour-and-a-half lecture, but very understandable. I make a point to make it understandable.
Wow, that's incredible. So if you're watching today, make sure that you click on the button and grab up the great gift that Dr. Vera has today. And do it today, because you know what happens if you out of sight, out of mind, and
yes.
or out of mind, out of sight, whatever it is. If you don't do it now, you'll forget to come back and do it. So thank you so much, Dr. Vera, again, for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk about this really important subject.
Thank you. And also, if you get a chance, pick up a copy of my book, Food Junkies, Recovery from Food Addiction, where I explain all of this if you don't want to watch it on the YouTube. And I have a fabulous Facebook group. If you're motivated and you want to decide to get help and get it free, join the Facebook group. I'm Sweet Enough, Sugar Free for Life.
Awesome. Well, we'll put that in the link as well,
Thank
so
you.
we make sure that people can easily get to those things for sure. All right. Thank you again, Dr. Vera.
Thank you.